It's a dazzling display of teamwork in action. It starts with the marketing department.
Car wash! Car wash!
The real teamwork display comes on the car wash assembly line. These kids are from different backgrounds and different religious traditions. They can work together and have fun together because they're learning to understand those differences. And basically, that means understanding world religions. Among the major religious traditions of the world, Judaism has a relatively small number of believers, but a very big influence on the world's religious history. There are about 14 million Jews in the world today. About 5 million of them live in the United States, and almost that many live in the country of Israel. The story of the Jewish religion begins almost 4,000 years ago in the lands of the Middle East.
The Jewish people trace the beginning of their history to a man named Abraham. It's believed that Abraham lived about 4,000 years ago. According to Jewish tradition, God promised to make Abraham the father of a great nation and promised that Abraham's descendants would be God's chosen people. The Jews were among the first people in the world to worship only one God instead of many different gods. That makes Judaism the first major monotheistic religion. As the Jewish sacred writings tell the story, Abraham's descendants were enslaved in the land of Egypt. God chose a man to lead the people out of slavery and back to the land they believed God had promised to Abraham and his descendants. This promised land was a place known as Canaan. The chosen leader was Moses. He led the people out of Egypt, an event known in Jewish history as the Exodus. And it was Moses, Jews believe, who received the laws of God directly from God's hand, written on stone tablets. This is known as the Ten Commandments and is the centerpiece of Jewish law. In the years that followed, the Promised Land became a kingdom. The Jewish people thrived and built a temple in their capital city of Jerusalem. But those days of glory didn't last long. Foreign invaders came from all sides. The people and their rulers were forced to submit to the orders of foreign kings. Through many centuries, Jerusalem and its temple were destroyed, rebuilt, and then destroyed again. As captives or as refugees, the Jewish people and their religion dispersed throughout the world. Jews call this great scattering diaspora. The Jews usually were seen as outsiders in the lands where they lived. Sometimes the people in other lands showed tolerance for the outsiders. During the Middle Ages in Spain, for example, the Muslims who ruled tolerated the Jews' religious life. The result was a kind of golden age of science and learning, as Jews and Muslims worked side by side to develop medicine, astronomy, philosophy, and the arts. The world is still reaping the benefits of their achievements. But some Christians who ruled Europe during the Middle Ages believed the Jews were a threat to the Christian religion and the reigning political power. So Jews were often robbed, driven out of their homes, and many were killed. The persecution of Jews during the Middle Ages was the beginning of the prejudice now known as anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is responsible for some of the greatest tragedies in the history of the Jewish people. During the late 1800s and early 1900s, Jewish communities in Russia suffered a series of attacks called pogroms. Neighborhoods were burned, men, women, and children were killed. Russians used the pogroms to keep the Jewish population small and powerless. But perhaps the worst suffering in the history of the Jews started in the 1930s when Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party came to power in Germany. The Nazis took away the legal rights of all Jews living in Germany. Then they rounded up many Jews and sent them to concentration camps. Finally, as World War II began, the Nazis set out to systematically eliminate all the Jews of Europe by killing them. Anti-Semitism was so strong throughout the world that some countries helped the Nazis find and kill Jews. Others, including the United States, did very little at first to protest against what the Nazis were doing or to help the Jews escape to safer places. By the end of World War II, 2 out of every 3 Jews in Europe had been killed. At least 6 million Jews, along with nearly as many non-Jews. This is the world tragedy known as the Holocaust. In 1948, 3 years after the end of World War II, the independent state of Israel was established. It was founded amid conflict with its Arab neighbors. But for millions of Jews, Israel represents a place that gives them freedom to live and shape their lives as Jews.
In spite of all of the suffering caused by anti-Semitism, the Jewish people have developed and preserved a rich culture. The heart of that culture and of their religious tradition is in the words of the sacred writings of Judaism.
Lecha Adonai hagedula v'gevura.
These are the words of the Torah. According to Jewish tradition, the Torah is the story of the Jewish people's journey to understand what God expects of them. Many Jews feel that it is important to learn Hebrew to be able to read the sacred writings as they were first written.
Notain HaTorah.
Amen.
Along with the Torah, Jews study the words of the Talmud. Jewish scholars and teachers spent centuries studying and interpreting the Torah. The Talmud is a collection of the rules and interpretations they've developed to help put God's law into practice. Jews believe the Torah teaches that God made a covenant, an agreement, with Abraham and his descendants. This covenant states that Jews will live and act as God's people, and God will be their God and bless them. God gave the Jewish people the law to show Jews how God expects them to act. That's why Jews believe the Torah is a sacred book.
The sacred writings of Judaism are housed in a place of worship. That place can be called a synagogue, a temple, or a shul. It's a place for worship services, for study, and it's a center for Jewish community life.
My name is Rabbi Aaron Brusso. The synagogue serves 3 purposes. It is a place of study where Jews come to study the Torah and the Talmud and to learn Hebrew, the language of those writings.
Asher Anochi Mitzavcha Hayom Al Levavecha.
The synagogue is also a place of assembly for any gathering of our community. And finally, it is a place of prayer.
והבאתם את עומר, ראשית קצירכם אל הכהן.
There are daily services, and there are Sabbath or Shabbat worship services on Friday nights and Saturday mornings. And we also gather here to pray on special holy days. The prayers of the people are recited, chanted, and sung. A person known as a cantor leads these songs and chants. The chants and melodies have been handed down through the centuries, so the cantor plays an important role in our tradition.
You deliver us from the hands of oppressors and save us from the fists of tyrants.
It is the role of the rabbi to teach the lessons of the Torah. The word rabbi means teacher. Each week during services, we read aloud from the Torah. The scrolls are kept in a special place called the Holy Ark and taken out and handled with great reverence for the readings. The Torah read in the synagogue is copied by hand in Hebrew on rolls of sheepskin. It can take a full year to create a finished scroll. Near the ark is a light that must always be kept burning. In the ancient temple in Jerusalem, there used to be a light that burned forever, ongoing. And we've imported that symbol into our synagogues. Sometimes it's represented as a light bulb, sometimes it's an actual flame. It is known as the eternal light. The prayer shawl, or the talit, is a garment that rests on our shoulders, and at each corner there is a knotted and twisted tassel. And the twists and knots add up to 613, which are the commandments that we have counted are in the Torah. To fill in are leather straps and boxes that we bind on our arms and on our head when we worship. It says in the Torah that we should bind God's commandments as a sign upon our arms and between our eyes. A yarmulke, or a kippah, is a head covering that we wear. It says in the Talmud that we should always be aware that God is around us, and it is the kippah on our heads that reminds us of that.
The lessons of the Torah include what Jews believe are the laws of God. The heart of those laws and the heart of Jewish beliefs are found in what is called the Ten Commandments.
Andrew and his father talk about their belief in the Ten Commandments.
First one is that you should only observe one God and there is only one God. And the second one is you should not pray to idols or worship idols.
What's the next commandment?
The third commandment is that we shouldn't use God's name in vain or use it in a bad way.
And how do we observe the fourth commandment?
The fourth one is observing the Sabbath, following the rules that God made.
And so he wanted us to keep that day special and set that day aside from all other days, to make it holy, to not work and not do the normal things.
The fifth one, and the most important one, is honor your father and mother.
Very good. You've done a good job of that. What are the next commandments?
You shall not kill, and shall not commit adultery. You should be faithful and fair to your husband or wife.
Okay. Next one.
The eighth one is you should not steal. The ninth is to not accuse someone of doing something they didn't do or make false accusations. And the 10th one is that you should not envy someone of something that they have that you don't have.
Why did God give us the Ten Commandments?
Well, I think God gave us the 10 Commandments just as the guidelines that God wanted us to follow to create the world that God set out to make.
Everyone who practices Judaism believes in the importance of good works and the Ten Commandments. But there are a lot of differences in the way different Jews practice their religion. Today, there are at least 3 main branches of Judaism in the United States alone. Orthodox Jews believe that the Torah and the Talmud contain God's words. They follow the rules in those writings very strictly, and only men can serve as rabbis. Reform Jews base their beliefs on the same writings and follow the moral and ethical teachings of Judaism, but they don't practice as many of the traditional customs and ceremonies as Orthodox Jews. In the middle are conservative Jews. They believe in the teachings of the Talmud and the Torah and believe that the traditional Jewish practices can be adapted to fit the modern world. Both Reform and conservative synagogues accept women as rabbis. So the way a Jewish family practices their religion may depend on which branch of Judaism they observe.
Hannah and her family practice conservative Judaism, and they observe the Sabbath according to Jewish tradition. For many Jews, the Sabbath is a day of rest and observance. Jews believe that they were commanded by God to keep this day holy. The Sabbath begins at sunset on Fridays and ends at sunset on Saturdays.
I guess it makes me feel like part of a culture and part of a religion and part of like a past because I've been doing it so long.
When the sun goes down, Hannah and her family light candles, say blessings, and wish each other Shabbat Shalom, which means Sabbath peace to you.
Shabbat Shalom.
Then they enjoy a wonderful meal together.
It's the one time our whole family's together and we're just sitting down and we talk and we eat, and it's like the main meal of the week. We just have a good time.
Like many Jewish families, Hannah's family keeps kosher, which means they follow the dietary laws found in the Torah and Talmud. These are called the laws of kashrut. Meat must be prepared in a way that removes all blood before it's cooked. No pork, no shellfish like shrimp and oysters, and meat and milk products can't be served at the same meal.
The first idea about keeping kosher comes from the Bible, and it has to do with not taking an animal's life from its source of life. And there are other laws and rules about not eating animals that are unclean. Friday night's the one night that we assume, we know for sure, that we'll all be together. And so that in and of itself makes it, just a really special way to start out the weekend together.
When you see a family observing the Sabbath, you're seeing an example of how central family life is in the Jewish tradition. And one of the happiest family occasions in Judaism comes when a new generation passes from childhood to adulthood in a bar mitzvah ceremony. Bar mitzvah, which means a son of the commandment, marks a boy's coming of age. In some Jewish communities, there's a similar celebration for girls called a bat mitzvah ceremony. For both boys and girls, the bar and bat mitzvah celebration is one of the high points of their lives.
With the help of his cantor, Andrew is rehearsing for his bar mitzvah.
So Friday night we'll be actually in the chapel.
Bar mitzvah is when a Jewish child enters the adult stage of their life, and becoming a bar mitzvah is a very meaningful thing in your life because it's taking on the responsibilities of being an adult. So you have a lot more work put on you.
And then we call you back up to do the Kiddush for festivals.
Right.
Okay?
Mm-hmm. Your parents come up and present the talis to you. You say a prayer in acceptance of it and putting it on, and then they say a prayer kind of praising you.
When you wrap yourself in that, it is a commandment. It is something that is obligatory of an adult Jew, which is now what you're being ushered into.
I'm very excited, a little nervous, just not wanting it to go by too fast since it's taken so long to get here. I want it to last as long as it can.
That's why you're facing the ark. You're bringing the prayers of the congregation. And you are leading them in prayer and also setting the pace and the mood of a service.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. That's another special thing about on your bar mitzvah. It's the first time that you are allowed to do the Torah reading in front of the congregation.
So your first one starts by Deber Adonai al Moshe Lemor Shor o Chesed.
Yep.
Okay, so we're going to get that ready for you.
There's a party after, and it's where all your friends and families and anybody that you invited, they come and celebrate with you, and just for dinner and dancing and a lot of fun.
In addition to Jewish traditions, Jewish holy days mark turning points too. Turning points in the year and in the history of the Jewish people. The most sacred Jewish holidays are in the fall. They're the high holy days, which mark the beginning of the Jewish New Year.
Rebecca talks about the significance of some Jewish holidays.
That's the sound of the ram's horn. We call it the shofar. The shofar sounds every day for a month, leading up to Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, according to the traditional Jewish calendar. It's called to repentance, to be sorry for what we've done wrong, and to begin the new year living the way God commands us to. Rosh Hashanah begins at sundown. It's our New Year celebration. But it isn't just a time for celebrating. The first 10 days of the new year, we reflect on how we've lived our lives during the old year. At the end of the 10 days comes one of the holiest days of the year, Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. Atonement means to make up for something you've done wrong. As atonement for our sins, we spend most of the day in the synagogue praying. Lots of people fast, which means they don't eat anything all day. When the shofar sounds again at the end of Yom Kippur, it means the high holidays are over. We have other celebrations during the winter. Hanukkah celebrates a victory in ancient Israel over the tyrants who tried to destroy our religion. Kids like this one a lot because it's become tradition to give and receive presents during Hanukkah.
In the spring comes a very serious and holy day called Passover. Passover commemorates the time in history when Jews were freed from slavery. According to Jewish tradition, when Moses demanded freedom for the people enslaved in Egypt, Egypt's ruler, the Pharaoh, refused. So God sent a series of 10 plagues against Pharaoh and his people. Their water turned to blood, daylight turned to darkness, clouds of locusts swarmed over them. After every plague, Pharaoh was willing to let the Israelite people go, but he always changed his mind. Finally, God sent the angel of death through the land of Egypt. Death took the firstborn son in every Egyptian home. But God protected the Israelite people, and death passed over their homes. It was the severity of this 10th plague that convinced Pharaoh to free the Israelite people. When Pharaoh later commanded the Egyptian army to bring the Jews back, God parted the waters of the Red Sea to allow the Israelite people through. But when the Egyptian army tried to follow, the waters of the Red Sea closed over them. Jewish families gather together to celebrate Passover. During the Seder, the story of the Exodus is retold and traditional foods are eaten, which help each generation relive the Passover experience and make it their own. Jews believe that during the first Passover, God commanded the people to leave Egypt quickly so they didn't have time for their bread to rise. This bread is represented in the Passover meal as matzah. Parsley, or a spring vegetable, is dipped into salt water, representing the tears of the slaves in Egypt. The bitter herb, or maror, represents the bitterness of slavery. Haroset is a sweet mixture of apples, nuts, and cinnamon that represents the mortar used by the slaves to build structures for Pharaoh.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam.
At the Seder, special songs and blessings are handed down from generation to generation as customs of Passover.
Judaism has a rich heritage of culture and tradition that has been preserved despite centuries of persecution of the Jewish people. The richness of Judaism is also seen in the powerful influence it has had on the world's two largest religions. Christianity and Islam both trace their beginnings to Abraham, and their teachings owe a lot to the teachings of the Hebrew Bible. Among many other things, Judaism taught the importance of treating other people fairly and giving help to those who need it. And that's a teaching you'll find in just about any religious tradition.